Looks can be deceiving is the saying that comes to mind when it comes to Rainbow Cotton. I briefly took a look at this game and was drawn to it because of its anime aesthetics, but also because I like shmups. At a glance, it looks like a cute game that you can beat within a play session or two, but it ended up being much more than that. Not only because of the visuals already brought up, but also because of how nice and upbeat its music was. I really liked how varied and different it was. At times it was upbeat electronica, but other times it was more like jazz. It helped keep the overall game fresh because of how repetitive it can be, but also because it's an on-rails shooter. There's plenty of gameplay involved, and it's not as if it's a visual novel with limited mechanics, but it helps when other aspects of a game help spice it up. Being a massive anime fan, it's not a surprise at all that I was drawn to Rainbow Cotton because of its anime aesthetics. While that's true, I was quickly left thinking if the anime cutscenes were longer than they needed to be. It's because at times they went on longer than I thought they would, and that made them come off as filler. Don't get me wrong, the cutscenes were awesome and amusing in more ways than one, but they also gave off the impression that they were fluffed up. The reason being that if you're a very skilled player, Rainbow Cotton can be beaten in around an hour, maybe less. The difficulty of Rainbow Cotton is something I'll get into later on. Besides the game's aesthetics and how they immediately drew me in, something else that quickly grabbed my attention was how smooth flying on the broom felt. It's nice that it was this way because it's 50% or more of what you'll be doing in Rainbow Cotton. It's an on-rails shooter, but I liked how it approached verticality. There was more to it than I thought there'd be, and it was nice that the movement wasn't as restricted as in other similar games. The enemy attacks and patterns also made it so that you'd want to be constantly moving around. That aspect of the game keeps you guessing and on your toes in order to avoid taking damage. While I still think that the movement in Rainbow Cotton was more than I expected it'd be, it wasn't as good as it could have been in other areas. More specifically, it wasn't always easy to collect items/collectibles. That was frustrating because sometimes I really needed one of the special abilities that was available to me, or extra health. That wasn't a game-breaking issue, but when I most needed it to come true for me, it didn't. The majority of what I'll discuss in this first impressions video for Rainbow Cotton is how difficult it ended up being. I like to think of myself as a skilled player, but sometimes the game will end up humbling me. Like I said, looks can be deceiving. You think this is a cute magical girl anime type game that would be better suited for your niece or daughter, but that's not entirely true. To start with, Rainbow Cotton doesn't feature continues, and once you're out of lives, you have to restart from the beginning of the game. I've previously encountered this, having been introduced to gaming back in the early 90s, but this stands out more than ever now because of how most modern games are. It makes sense though, seeing as how this is a port for a game that was originally released back in 2000, so it's appropriate for it to approach this aspect of the game how it does. There were ways to deal with the difficulty, thanks to Rainbow Cotton featuring an easy mode, but I didn't want to fall back on that. I started off playing on normal, and the idea was to beat it that way. It also helped that different routes spiced things up. Some routes were harder than others, so I quickly learned when to favor one route over another. Despite that, I still found Rainbow Cotton harder than I thought it would be, and that's one of the main reasons why this is a first impressions video. It makes sense that a game would get harder as you near its end, but the difficulty jump around that portion of the game was massive. I had to think of different strategies because of how hard the end game was. Flying towards the top of the levels helped avoid enemies and projectiles, but that wasn't enough. Figuring things out like that on my own made me realize that Rainbow Cotton is beatable, but even I have my limits. I still know that I can beat the game, but with the number of games I review and play on a regular basis, there's a point where I have to decide whether to keep at it or just move on. If anything, I invested more time into Rainbow Cotton than I should have. I'm not saying that I regret all of the time I spent with it, seeing as how at the end of the day it was still fun and a challenge worth overcoming, but I eventually threw in the towel. It didn't help that I had to learn about more intricate mechanics/abilities by asking someone involved with the port for help. I also stumbled into more thanks to looking online. Around 2 or 3 hours into my time with Rainbow Cotton, I knew that having to keep restarting from the very beginning would get old quick. Rather than just dealing with that or getting good, I looked for help online and saw that there was an extra lives cheat. That was super helpful, and it's not impossible to beat Rainbow Cotton without the use of this cheat, but at the same time, this game's a hell of a marathon. Even small damage quickly adds up to a lot, and it doesn't help that this was my first time playing this game. It's usually my first playthrough when I decide to review a game, but with some it's as if it's not enough to learn as you go. An example that comes to mind involves Soulsborne games. If you're a fan of these games, chances are you'll get the hang of a new Soulsborne and its mechanics within a timely manner, mainly due to your experience with similar games. If you're a newcomer, you may eventually learn, but it'll require a lot more time and effort than experienced players. That's how I felt when it came to Rainbow Cotton. Like I said, it didn't help that I had to search online for tips/tricks that could have been part of a manual. I realize a manual won't straight up tell you about an extra lives cheat, but I would have appreciated knowing that I could have used fairies to target enemies, or that I could have used them alongside my special abilities. Figuring that out 2 to 3 hours before I threw in the towel with Rainbow Cotton was later than I would have liked. Had I known about most of this from the beginning, it would have saved me a lot of time and effort. The point isn't to say that Rainbow Cotton is impossible to beat and that it would have been better had it featured more hand-holding, but I don't like having to go out of my way to figure out how to utilize aspects of a game that could have been explained earlier on. I actually decided to stop playing 2 times before I entirely stopped. The first time was due to a Ghost Reaper mini-boss in level 5. Getting to it with a decent amount of health, firing power, and special abilities was a hassle. I eventually learned how to get there in better shape, but it still didn't help that this boss was very hard when compared to some of the earlier ones. What frustrated me was that there weren't checkpoints after beating mini-bosses. At one point I spent 3 hours on this level/section only to keep dying and having to restart from the beginning. After all I had to go through to overcome the mini-boss, it would have been helpful had I been able to continue from there during subsequent attempts. Once I learned more about what I was capable of thanks to online tips and learning from constant failure, I was able to reach the final boss of level 5. Thankfully, you're able to continue directly from the final boss if you end up getting killed. In order to preserve that, I would just put my Switch to sleep and continue from there during my next play session. I was in a much better place with this final boss, but in some ways, it was even worse because it was harder to overcome when compared to the Ghost Reaper boss. It didn't help that I eventually got to a point where my basic firing abilities were underpowered, and I didn't have all of the special abilities I could have had. Through effort and countless attempts, I was able to beat this boss, but what happened next broke me. It's one thing to throw in the towel because you've come to the conclusion that you're just not good enough, but to find out that you're fully capable and the game ends up crashing on you, that's different. I beat level 5 and was watching the cutscene before the final boss, but then the game crashed. I restarted the game blindly hoping that I would somehow be able to continue from where I left off, but that wasn't the case. Instead of restarting, I came to the conclusion that I'd seen enough of the game to write a first impressions video. It also doesn't help that I've had carpal tunnel syndrome/tendinitis in the past, so playing for long sessions where I was furiously pressing a single button to maintain a high fire rate left my right hand killing me. Despite the issues I had with Rainbow Cotton, I still consider it a fun game. Had I not been enjoying myself, I wouldn't have kept trying to overcome the challenges I encountered. The game would have been even better had I known what I was fully capable of right from the start, but I can understand why a port of a game originally released 24 years ago wouldn't at least have a downloadable manual. I don't think Rainbow Cotton is a game that general players would enjoy. Some may dislike that it's difficult and an on-rails shooter. It's pretty much a game meant for a niche audience that already likes these games and that offer this kind of aesthetic. On that note, it's worth mentioning that when I was looking for help online, I realized that some refer to this kind of game as shmups. The idea being that they're shmups, but since they feature an anime-heavy/cute aesthetic, they're a subgenre within a subgenre. Honestly, I'm all for it, not only because I like anime, but also because I like shmups. What's great is that there are a ton of games within this subgenre, so I'll eventually be able to play similar games that are just as good, if not better than Rainbow Cotton. What are your thoughts when it comes to games not informing you of what you're fully capable of? At what point do you feel comfortable walking away from a game? Would a game with cute anime aesthetics prevent you from giving it a try? If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much for watching.